in Hungary, and what's the EU's reaction, or as some critics say, lack thereof. With us to talk about it, Georgi Shupflin of MEP from the ruling Fidesz party, Georgi Bulgar, journalist with Club Radio, a radio station that's scheduled to be shut down by the month of March in Budapest, Christophe Robit, the France 24 European Affairs editor, and Austrian member of the European Parliament from the Greens, Ulrike Lunacek. Welcome back to all of you. Before the break, we were discussing why this was all coming to a head at this moment. And, you know, when we talked about also the Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, who over the weekend told the Hungarian news agency that no EU nation should be measured according to double standards, he says. Christophe Robit, when it comes to this issue of reform at the level of the central bank, with the government allowed to name people to the bank, is that a double standard? Has he got a point there?
Well, I think what is clear at this stage is that there is a standoff between Brussels and Budapest. It is indeed the mission of the European Commission as the guarantor of EU treaties to investigate, to look into these changes in the constitution. Indeed, when you hear that a third vice governor can be appointed by the Prime Minister, this raises questions about the independence of the Central Bank of Hungary. And preserving, guaranteeing the independence of the Central Bank is, of course, enshrined in the EU treaty. So it is now the mission of the Commission to look into those claims. Are there any double standards? Well, it's always the same at EU level. This story, of course, brings to mind what happened in 2000 when in Austria, Jörg Haider, who is now died in a crash, as we know, but at the time joined a government stemming from a far-right party. This, at the time, caused outrage in Brussels. We remember that the Commission called on the European Court of Justice to investigate, well, at least to give its opinion. At the time, Austria was ostracized. It left a bit of a bitter aftertaste, I think, because it did not work out. We don't know what the Commission will do. What is clear is that the EU on the whole has been much more muted than the US. We all heard what Hillary Clinton had to say about the recent developments in Hungary. The EU so far very, very muted, I should say, even at the level of the European Parliament. For one reason also, don't forget that Fidesz belongs to the EPP party, which is the largest party in the European Parliament, and so far the EPP has been rather supportive of Mr. Orban.
All right. Hillary Clinton, by the way, sounding the alarm when she visited last June, the U.S. Secretary of State, doing it again at the end of December in a letter that she sent. According to reports, she spoke about the systematic dismantling of Hungary's democratic institutions and reiterated U.S. concerns about the independence of the Hungarian judiciary, the country's new church law, and the freedom of the media. What's your reaction to that, Georgi Shupflin?
I'm not even sure where to begin. I think the basic reality, which very few people want to recognize, is that there's a deeply divided society in Hungary. The left has the support of maybe 20–25% of the population, primarily concentrated in Budapest. They make the most noise. Don't forget that the far right is also a part of the opposition. At the moment, they're getting about 25% support. And the Greens, that's Mrs. Lunacek's party, have more than once said they'd really like to join up, have some kind of a coalition with Jobbik, the far-right party. In response to what Mrs. Lunacek said earlier, if I might continue, in response to what Mrs. Lunacek said earlier, she doesn't reckon or doesn't know that last year the Hungarian opposition frequently took no part in the debate. They were on strike, in effect. And there were constant attempts on the part of the government to consult with them. They refused to do so. It's very difficult to know what to do with an opposition that actually refuses to oppose, but simply walks out. Now, in response to the other point about the central bank, a compromise has now been reached between the Prime Minister and the head of the central bank. There's an official statement to this effect. I think that particular story is over. The particular issues raised by Mrs. Clinton, some of these, it seems to me, are based on inaccurate information. Not many people know Hungarian, and hey-ho, that even includes the State Department. And you've really got to know the language of the country you're dealing with before you can make adequate judgment.
You say that a deal has been reached. What kind of a deal has been reached in Washington with the IMF?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying a deal has been reached between the Hungarian Prime Minister and the head of the central bank, Mr. Shimor.
Okay, and they're singing from the same hymn sheet?
Yeah. Who knows if they sing hymns? But it looks as if they've reached an agreement. And by the way, as far as changing the Monetary Council and introducing new vice presidents, that was already part of the practice of the Hungarian left. I think it was already being done in 2003 or 4. Nobody squeaked at all. Nobody raised a single voice when the then head of the Hungarian National Bank, Zsigmond Járai, was constantly harassed by the left-wing government.
All
Nobody
right,
said anything.
Ulrika Lunacek.
Yes. Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, let me make one thing clear. LMP, our sister party in Hungary, is a very young party. It has just been in parliament since the last elections. So they were not part of any kind of government before. And there's no way that LMP would ever cooperate on whatever level with Jobbik, with the extreme right-wing, racist, extreme nationalist party. Rather, Mr. Orban is closer to that than we are.
Nonsense.
And the other thing, yes, it's true. That's not nonsense. You know that's nonsense. And let me now finish, please.
I can prove it to you chapter
let me go
and verse
ahead.
that
Look, you
LMP
cannot prove
offered a
that.
coalition
No,
to
Mr.
Jobbik.
Schöpflin, that's not true. I know that. I've
It's
been
true.
in contact.
I can prove it to
I
you.
know LMP since before they came about to become a party.
Then they're
I
lying
was
to you.
president of the European Green Party. No, they're not lying to me. Come on, I know
Then
them
they're
better
lying
than
to
you
you.
do.
It's
Let
there
me
in
now
black and
let me
white.
go
I can
ahead
send
with
you
the
the link.
Constitution. It's
And I will
not
do so.
true, Mr. Schöpflin. Simply,
It is true.
let me
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead. And about
You
the
know,
Constitution,
you're
yes, it's true. The
misinformed, Mrs.
Constitution,
Lunacek.
Mr.
You don't know enough
Schöpflin, may I
about
please
Hungary.
finish? I'm informed
do.
well enough. You believe me that. About the Constitution, yes, some parts had been known. But the problem I refer to, and also LMP and others refer to, that for the parliamentary debate, it was 5 weeks that Orban granted to the opposition to debate it. Do you really think that's enough for a constitution to be debated? That's one thing. And I really don't understand why you, who has been so outspoken against autocratic regimes while they were still in place until 20 years ago, and which luckily have fallen, you have been a political scientist, you are a political scientist, teaching at the University of London. How come you do not see
anymore,
what your
not for
own
many
party
years.
is doing now, what your own party is doing now, with cutting on the independence of media, with cutting on the independence of judiciary, with doing away with parliamentary debates, with doing away with involving civil society, with cutting the rights of the Constitutional Court, and with putting people in all top institutions
All right,
of
on
your
this-
country.
on
And
this
let me say
point-
one thing around Austria for 10 years ago. I was a national parliamentarian
answer
at that
this?
time. No, I'd like to finish now, please. I
Finish
know
then.
what the so-called sanctions against Austria 10 years ago, what kind of effect they had in a way, because they were not well devised. That's when Article 7 then was made in order to go against violations of fundamental values in other EU countries. And I know how
Did
difficult
that leave a
it is
bitter
for
taste for
people
you?
in
The fact that
Hungary
the
to make it
sanctions.
clear this is not
Let me interrupt
against
you there,
Hungary.
Ulrika Lunacek. Ulrika Lunacek. At the time,
Yeah.
just for our
Excuse
viewers
me?
who don't
Yeah, I
know.
cannot-
At the time, this was the far right in Austria, Jörg Haider. He enters the government, and
His party,
the
not him
sanctions were
himself,
relatively
luckily.
ineffective. Did that leave a bitter taste for you then?
It did in a certain way, but let me also make it the one thing that what helped was that Mr. Haider himself did not become part of the government, just his party, which was bad enough, but he himself did not become, he remained governor in Carinthia. The bad taste that was left was that it was seen as being against the country, against Austria itself. And that's something I do not want to happen with Hungary. It's not against the Hungarian people, it's not against Hungary as a country, as a republic. It's against the measures the government is taking. And I know very much how difficult the social situation for so many people is. Our sister party, LMP, is really trying to sort of support these people, to work against the measures taken against homeless people by the Fidesz party. So there is this concern that if the European Union acts on something that is common to all of us, these common European values, that it is being seen and it can be instrumentalized by the ruling party of saying anybody who is against these, what the European Union, the action the European Union has taken, is against Hungary in that case.
Let me bring in at this point a point that Christophe Robit mentioned, the fact that the European Parliament's largest coalition, the centre-right European People's Party, it came out over the weekend or at the end of last week with a statement. The Hungarian Parliament has replaced a Stalin-like constitution that dated back to 1949. The new constitution includes the Charter of Fundamental Rights, and a new fair electoral system has been established, offering the possibility of minorities to be represented in Parliament. And this document is signed by two of the most prominent politicians in Brussels, Wilfried Martens and Joseph Daul. And this is, of course, the same coalition that includes the likes of the EU President, Herman Van Rompuy, the European Commissioner, José Manuel Barroso, the center-right EPP. I want to ask Georgi Bolgar, what are you expecting and what do you think about the EPP's reaction?
Well, it's something new because previously they were not willing to criticize the Hungarian government in any way. So this is a first sign. It's a sign that Europe is fed up with the Hungarian government at last. It should be fed up with it because it goes against the main European values. It's dismantling democracy. The Hungarian government, in effect, creates one-party rule with a two-thirds majority. They are doing everything what they want in minutes, actually, in the parliament. They can limit media freedom. They can limit judicial independence. They can limit the independence of the Constitutional Court. They can do whatever they want to, and the European countries looked at it with abhorrence, with saying sometimes nothing, but lately more and more criticism has come in.
But that statement I just read was very soft. It says basically
it was.
And I just want to point to some of the reactions we've also been getting from the France 24 Debate Facebook page. Michael Takura Kanyuchi from Harare, he says, we asked, what should Europe do? He says it's complicated. There's the issue of sovereignty, especially when it's a government with a majority in parliament. Again, a two-thirds majority in parliament, elected fairly and squarely. Lorenzo Di Tampa on Facebook, the EU has the responsibility for its own members. If one of the member states has a renegade leader who is out of control and taking the country down a path not consistent with EU agreements, then yes, the EU should take whatever action is needed. Christophe Robit, you heard Ulrika Lunacek talk about how difficult it is to take action because you get the citizens of the said country quickly get the sense that it's the entire nation that's being pinpointed.
Well, one thing is sure is once you're in the club, it's more difficult than when you're outside and aspiring to join. Look at, for instance, what can be done in the Balkans or the pressure that was applied to Bulgaria or Romania before they joined. Once you're in the club, it's more difficult. You have to look at the different levels. In the European Parliament, as you said, the EPP party to which Fidesz belongs is the largest party. So until the EPP refuses to ostracize or to turn its back on Mr. Orban, it will be difficult for the European Parliament as a whole to have a say. Look at the level of the Commission. There, as you said, Mr. Barroso also belongs to the EPP, but still, we know that the Commission is independent. We're not looking at the parties, but still for the Commission, it is, of course, the Commission has the means, but it needs to make a decision. At the level of the Council, the heads of state and governments, we know that there's a lot of peer pressure under Berlusconi and the previous leaders. You didn't not often hear Mr. Sarkozy or Angela Merkel saying outright what they thought. So there is a lot of peer pressure. It is hard for Europe to come up with a clear, I think, with a clear solution. But what is sure is that if the Commission, and I say if the Commission, believes that this new constitution is against the interest of Europe and contradicts the EU treaties, by not reacting, it will create a precedent, and who knows who will be next.
Ulrike Lunacek, what's your prediction as to what's going to happen?
Well, I know that some members of the European People's Party of several countries here in the European Parliament also see the developments in Hungary with quite a lot of concern. And as the colleague who just spoke before has said, that the rather soft but still critical statement of Mr. Daul and Mr. Martens shows that there is criticism inside the European People's Party. We will have this week negotiations. Next week we meet in Strasbourg to see whether we can get a resolution voted by a majority, which also demands the starting of this Article 7 fundamental values procedure. I hope we will get a majority from that. And it's not about ostracizing Hungary. It's not about throwing Hungary out of the European Union or anything like that. It's about making it clear that these are our common values. And I see that also in the European People's Party, there are colleagues who, as I said before, share this concern.
Share that concern.
I do hope
Let me
we
just,
will
because
get a
we're almost out
majority
of time,
for
I
that.
want to give György Schöpflin one last chance to answer. What is your prediction as to what's going to happen?
It's perfectly possible that the left will steamroller this thing through. Once it gets to the council, of course, it's much more difficult to get an 80% or 4/5 majority. I would like to thank Mrs. Lunacek for saying that I know about autocratic regimes. That's exactly why I know that what is happening in Hungary is still a democracy. Whatever Mrs. Lunacek and her friends say. Oh, and by the way, her sister party, the Greens in Hungary, LMP, have asked the Greens in Europe not to go ahead with this resolution. So that's how much solidarity there is on the left.
All right, and
But you know, but can I just say the final? But you know, Mr. Schöpflin, that LMP also said in their statement, and we've been consulting with them, that they understand the reasons why we go in order to protect European values.
All right. We're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately. I want to thank you, both of you, for joining us from Brussels, headquarters to the European Parliament, György Schöpflin and Ulrike Lunacek. I want to thank György Bolgar for being with us from Budapest, and also want to thank Christophe Robit for being with us here for the France 24 debate. Stay with us. Coming up next, it's time for Business. That's hosted by Marcus Carlson.